Daniel Boulud, of course, needs no introduction. I mean, you're here, you know who he is. But he's one of the most extraordinary chefs in America, and probably one of the most extraordinary chefs ever to work in America. His flagship restaurant, Daniel, has 3 Michelin stars from now until eternity. And the number of chefs who have come through his kitchen and have gone on to be successful is also phenomenal. He cooked in France. He worked in France. I first became aware of him when he was at Cirque, in the same location where his splendid restaurant Daniel is now, which was probably the restaurant of the 80s in New York, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
And now he's gone on to run not just that, but Cafe Boulud, Bar Boulud, DBGB, DB Bistro. I'm forgetting about
Boulud Sud.
Boulud Sud,
Yeah. Yes.
which has wonderful Provençal food near Lincoln Center, and the épicerie attached to it.
Yes, the retail now. It's new.
And you're in Singapore and Japan and
No, Singapore, Beijing, Toronto, Montreal, Miami, Palm Beach, and London. Yeah.
So the sun never sets on the Daniel Empire. And I thought I'd start with a confession that I don't think I've ever told anybody about. Mm-hmm. But a dozen years ago, when I was the restaurant critic at Gourmet Mag in New York, the New York Restaurant Critic, I had finally, after a month and a half of working, finished a review of Daniel, the flagship restaurant. And it was a rather critical review. I'd had some extraordinary meals there. I'd had some meals that were less than extraordinary. And I had this written in a notebook that I left in a taxi cab. The date that I left it in the taxi cab was September 10th, 2001. The next day, nobody was really interested in finding my notebook at all. And so the magazine was going to press, and there wasn't time to write another one. So I ended up taking another couple of months to write the review. And because Gourmet was a wonderful magazine and Condé Nast had deep pockets, it meant I got to go back to the restaurant 4 or 5 more times, in addition to probably the 6 or 7 that I had been there before in the course of the review. And in the course of those extra meals, some lunches back when you were open for lunch, some splendid dinners that seemed to start at 6:30 and carry on until midnight. I think either the restaurant discovered me or I discovered the restaurant, but there was these depths to the cooking. There was this detail to the cooking that had actually escaped me. I mean, the food tastes so good that you sometimes forget that it tastes good. And when you go to one of his restaurants, any of his restaurants, even the informal ones, when there's a dish with the brunoise will be perfect. I mean, you could sit there with a atomic ruler, and the tiny little cubes of carrot and onion wouldn't vary by more than a few angstroms, I'm sure. That the surface of the terrines is always perfect, not slick, not too shiny, but there's a detail. There are no fissures in it. There's never a broken sauce or even a hint of a broken sauce. There's never a hint of graininess in dishes that often have that. The meat is never either the sous vide technique that so many chefs use now, where you can have a big slab of lamb, and it's exactly the same texture in the center as it is on the outside, but you don't get that toughness on the outside and the squishiness on the inside either. Not only do people there know how to cook, not only do they know how to season, which happens much, much, much less frequently at even the greatest French restaurants in the world than you might hope, but there's this drive to this dish. There's this finish that's almost as perfect as the finish on these paintings you see on the walls here. That there is not a hair out of place. That's an important thing, the level of cuisine that Danielle is doing. It is something that is going away very quickly. I think that Los Angeles, though, in some ways is one of the greatest eating cities in the world, we don't have a restaurant like Danielle. We don't have a chef who is driven to that sort of detail, to that sort of perfection. And for that, we really have to look to what you're doing. I congratulate you.
Well, thank you. I'm always a little bit intimidated when I have to share a talk with a food critic. And because there is 3,000 miles between us, I think I accepted to come. And I think you accepted to do it also, because if I had a restaurant in LA, I don't think we will be,
no.
by respect to your profession. But no, and when you go back to the year 2000, I opened Restaurant Daniel in 93, and it took me 10 years to cook in America to convince somebody to help me financially to open my first restaurant, because life as a cook, you can never save enough money to make your own restaurant unless you maybe buy a truck and have a food truck, because that's a good start. And I think in LA, many good talent has it. But at the time, that wasn't that. And after these 6 years at the Cirque, it was important for me to create my own. I wanted to go back to Lyon, my hometown. And because my father, my family, my parents, my sibling were there. But I realized then I liked cooking in New York much more. And after 2 years, I nexted the idea about going to Lyon, and I started to raise money, and I was struggling a little bit, but then I met a gentleman, George Milo, and he said, I'd rather be your partner than one of them. And it will be much easier to work together, and he basically started me up. And of course, he was a very smart businessman, as he was CEO of one of the largest companies in America. But also, he let me do what I wanted. But the biggest thing when you create a restaurant, you invest money in a restaurant, is to go out of business. And I think, sorry, let me take this one. And I think, in reference to 2001, I still had the fear of not being able to make my business safe enough. And so you have to do more cover. You also worried, and you don't want to be too expensive because you may alienate yourself from the regular customer. I also had, so that has nothing to do with the cooking, but it still can affect a little bit. And I also had a lot of regular customers from my years at Le Cirque who were coming. And today, those customers who were a little bit older than me when I was 30-something are kind of fading away. And today, what Daniel is nothing to compare, and yet certainly the DNA is there, but there's nothing to compare with maybe 12 years ago, because I feel more safe today than I was then. And so sometimes, days can get chaotic for a chef to work. And it could affect the performance. And I think today we have made a lot of resolution at Daniel to really offer the best performance we can do. And I think it's, I'm happy, and maybe I was supported while the years early was always challenging.
It's difficult to open a restaurant of that size and that complexity, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it takes a while to settle down, right?
And I risk a lot of money then. 16 years ago, I borrowed $10 million to do a restaurant. So today, if somebody asked me to do it, I wouldn't go there. And so, and it was a restaurant of a fairly large size, but also I enjoy the life in my restaurant all the time. And I always felt, and at the end, what was important was to make my customer happy. And if I sometimes fail to impress a critic, at least I want to make sure my customer are happy. And I always told them, you know, am I trying to be the number one, and it don't matter what the bottom line is in my business, and can I really take care of my staff? No, that was not the idea. I wanted to be one of the best, but I wasn't fighting for number one.
You don't really have signature dishes. Every day there's something new.
It was abundance of ingredients, abundance of cooking every day. And for every cook who worked with me, I think it just made them crazy and happy. And the customer, you know, when they were coming twice a week sometime or more, I mean, they felt happy also because there was spontaneity beside the menu. But the sea bass, I created that dish at Le Cirque, and a couple of dishes I created at Le Cirque in this sort of accelerating moment in my career. It stuck to me for a long time, and it was, sometimes it's difficult to get rid of a dish on the menu because you know that you're gonna upset so many people with it. And you don't want to get stuck with your cooking also.
Did you ever wake up at night in a cold sweat some nights thinking that you're going to have to cook pasta primavera one more time?
No. No, but one thing is at Le Cirque, the only thing the chef never cooked was the pasta primavera. We had a prep guy who was pre-cooking the spaghetti. We had a prep guy who was making the vegetable, and the waiter were making the pasta.
Oh, so
because
funny.
the chef before me riot and said, no way, I'm never going to cook that pasta. So it was Sergio Maccioni and his waiter, typical Italian restaurant where Sergio was Italian, but he had a French chef. He didn't want to cook really Italian. But somewhere in him, he needed to do pasta. So.
Did you ever have a regular ask for it, Daniel?
No.
Thank goodness.
But I do a primavera for myself without the cream, without the butter, without the parmesan. I just put olive oil and a lot of vegetable and herbs. And
Before, an hour earlier, you and I were talking about our friend Bill Buford, who wrote some fantastic essays at the back of your new cookbook. I was sort of asking him what he thought the genius of Lyonnais cooking was. He said that, which surprised me, that without question, it's the quality of the produce and the quality of the farms and the way that, you know, the earth just puts forth, you know, vegetables and meat and dairy of a quality that doesn't exist anywhere on earth. Do you feel that sometimes?
I think it has a lot to do with it. I think Lyon is positioned between the north and the south. And you drive an hour south and you think you're in California. Maybe not always, but most of the time with the weather. I mean, we have a lot of orchard trees in the Rhone Valley. And of course, going a little bit more south, then you even have a lot of vegetable production. And the wine also, the wine region. And going north, you have Burgundy, you have the Dombes, which is also a rich region. You have the Alps, which is just on the left of it. And so I think this enclave of an hour radius, I think is amazingly covered. And then there's the cheese also regionally. And so I think it makes Lyon rich in its cooking.
So what was it like leaving that to come to New York?
No, I left Lyon when I was 17, and I started cooking at 14. And so, you work you 60 hours a week, 70 hours, depends, at 14. And then I was going to school twice a week for 3 hours in the afternoon in between the morning shift and the afternoon shift, and 1 day off a week. And so apprenticeship was tough, but and that's funny because we are always many apprentices. And when I was going to school, there was an apprentice from other restaurants, Bocuse and Roku, and of all those guys I've seen, I haven't seen too many next to me today. I mean, but after that, I wanted to work in some of the best restaurants in the world, and I always dream of traveling. And I was told early, and this is a wonderful job what you're doing, because you will be able to travel anywhere in the world and practice what you learn. And so I went to Georges Blanc, spent 2 years in Burgundy, or the region south of Burgundy. And it was when a transition moment where his mother was giving the restaurant to his son. He was 28 years old at the time. And he had 2 stars for many, many years. And it was La Mère Blanc, so it was, at the time, the mother's cooking. And so that was something very special to Lyon, the mothers as well. And then, after 2 years with Georges Blanc, I went to Roger Verger. He just had 3 stars that year in 1974. And he was amazing there. I spent 2 years with him, and I learned the flavor of Provence, but also great technique. He was a great technician, and it was also the time of Nouvelle Cuisine. So every chef was getting inspired by his traveling, by who was doing what, and there was, I think, a little bit of a movement at the time on changing French cuisine. But most of the chefs had a solid classic background, so you could really see the foundation of it. And after Verger, I wanted to go to Chapelle, back to Lyon a little bit, but outside, one of the best chefs there, and also at 3 stars. And Roger Verger said, I have a good thing for you if you want. I am a consultant in Denmark, and I'll send you there for 2 years. You'll be a sous chef. So I was 21 years old, and I was becoming a sous chef in Denmark. I was the only one knowing the menu and telling the chef there what to do.
I was actually at a restaurant in Copenhagen last month, and the old restaurant in the Tivoli, I forgot what it was, but the man who owned it was bragging about you.
Oh, really?
So he must have worked with you back in the day. I didn't know you ever worked
I think so,
in Denmark.
yeah, 2 years, and that was at the Hotel Plaza. And what made me dream to travel was this book called Tradition et Qualité, where it was this fraternity among the best chefs in the world, and it still exists today, and French Laundry and myself and many other restaurants in America are part of that. And it's only chef. And then there's also Relais Chateau, Relais Gourmand, where these are the small inn and also the chef restaurateur. And, when you're a kid and you work in one of them, you flip the books. Oh, God, Australia. I mean, America. So at Verger, when he said Denmark and the restaurant was in one of Tradition et Qualité, I said, it can't be bad. I mean, it should be good. But that Copenhagen was very interesting. I really developed a lot of opportunity to be spontaneous because I couldn't get stuck only with Roger Verger's cuisine, but I was kind of inspired with the ingredient there to cook the cuisine he loved and the cuisine he made, and a combination. And then by the time I was 23, I felt I am way too young to become a sous chef and to become a chef. I need to do another 3 star, which was really what I wanted to do. So I went to Michel Guérard. And Michel Guérard in France, in the southwest of France, was one of the most poetic, the most creative, and certainly the most interesting chef also to work for. And he had created Cuisine Master also at the time, which was the slim cuisine, the healthy cuisine. He had a spa to go with it, so that was also helpful. He could make you lose weight more by the machine working on you. But between the food and the machines and the body work and all that, after 2 weeks there, you will definitely lose pounds. But, and today, he just created a cooking school with his daughter, who is going to be with program in English next year on cuisine santé and healthy cuisine. And it's been aggregated by the, I don't know how you say, but aggregated by the government and all that. So he has a real solid program on that, and I think it's interesting.
I think probably one of the best meals I've ever had in my life was at Eugenie Ban. My wife and I, we were very young, like hitchhiked across the south of France because there were no like trains that went there.
Cool. I love Eugenie.
But the French government, I'm not sure if it still does it, but at the time, it would actually pay you as like part of its health program to like spend 2 weeks at the spa, like eating the cuisine monsieur.
Exactly. Just had to find an excuse, no problems. I could have the government pay for it.
I'm hoping that maybe Obamacare will allow us to do something like that here.
But after Michel Guérard, I went back to Denmark, but dreaming of traveling further. And I felt, and you know, being French in Denmark, you had to become Danish. Married a Danish girl and have Danish kid and start to speak Danish better. But I never felt lost with cooking. I felt the creativity there was really happening because all those chefs who worked in Europe, in France, I mean in the 70s, were coming back home and starting to be so creative with what they learned because they didn't have the same agenda than me. I was the chef to a very young restaurateur there for a year. And he's still there, and I have a wonderful restaurant called Jan Hortikal there. And but one day I got a call, and I say a friend called me and said, "Do you want to go to America? I got a job for you, and I can't go. I have 3 kids. I'm married, and somebody offered me that job to go to Washington to work for an embassy." And I said, "Well, that sounds good. You know, you got a lousy salary, but you got a car, an apartment, and a lot of vacations." So I couldn't complain. And so that gave me a chance to visit the entire country because every so often the ambassador will go away and the wife will say, "Oh, take a break." So I will go California north to south. I will go Florida, Southwest. And, you know, after that, you don't want to leave this country.
What was the point where you thought the ingredients, the agriculture that you were getting, you know, the meat and fish that you were getting in the United States was comparable to what you would get in France? Or has it not gotten to that point yet?
No. When I arrived in New York in 1982, which was the early 80s, the French restaurants were kind of stuck with the past a little bit, and they were very predictable. Everybody had the same menu, and they all had Dover sole meunière, and they all had the very predictable, but you know, you could take a chef from one restaurant and put him in another. It will be operational in a day, versus now in a month we can get somebody operational in the station. I mean, in a sense of being confident. The produce was really changing, but who made, because you know, between chef, the communication is constant and is. And today, the media are doing such a good job at helping us even widen our opportunity to reach out for produce. But then there was Jean-Louis Paladin. Jean-Louis Paladin was a chef I could relate to, who was just coming from France. He was at 28 years old in the southwest of France, near Michel Guérard. He had 2 stars. And then he had the opportunity to come to America at the Watergate and was cooking his cooking. And the menu was, forget about any compromise, choice, or anything. Every day, he will call his suppliers and he will tell his fishermen in Maine, "Go and get me scallop, but I want them in the shell. Go and get me pibal. Pibal is this baby eel you get in the southwest of France. But Jean-Louis was convinced that there will be pibal in Maine because they usually, so in the springtime when the eels who have gone up the rivers and have spawned, and now millions of baby eels are going down the river to go to the Sargasso Sea and the ocean. He was there with his flashlight and his nets, and with the guy trying to find pibals, and they found pibal, and everything like this. He had a retired lawyer who was living in Virginia and loved Jean-Louis' food and had a little farm. And Jean-Louis said, "Why don't you raise me squab, because I can't find good squab. They're too skinny. They're not good. They don't know how to raise them." And it was everything, with vegetable, with herbs, with fish, with meat. And I think he was the one who helped catapult the farmers a little bit on the Upper East also. I mean, California was having his movement with, of course, Alice Water, and later on a little bit Wolfgang here, and Jeremiah and Tower in San Francisco. But Washington and New York, we had a lady who was growing herbs in the Bronx, like, you know, like now you talk about city farming and all that, and everybody growing their tomatoes on the roof of Brooklyn. But there was this lady who was in an old factory of a pan company. I don't remember what pan was. And she was growing herbs in this old factory.
Fantastic.
And it was great. I mean, and it was really, what happened in the 70s in France was happening in America in the 80s.
I had an old collection of menus. I was looking at like a little Cirque menu from when you were cooking there in the 80s. And it was, like you say, it is Saumonier, it is the Goujonette, it is the Coquille Saint-Jacques. It's like...
Absolument. Straightforward, classic French cooking.
And because you knew Jean-Louis Paladin doing the great stuff at the Watergate, and you would obviously come from, Bocuse and Verger, did you feel like you were in a straitjacket having to cook that menu?
A little bit, but I had too much energy to burn. Jean-Louis had a 25-seat restaurant, and a lady here today told me that Jean-Louis, I don't know if you're here, but she went to Jean-Louis, and when they walked into the restaurant, Jean-Louis said, "I am cooking for you tonight," and they spent 4 hours dining in the most memorable meal. But Jean-Louis was writing his menu every day, and it was too prefixed, nothing else, just very much like a chef always dreamed to do. And I arrived at Le Cirque, and it was the LA time, you know what I mean, the menu. And already I trim it down, and I trim it down, but there was this compromise between what I could bring and what I had to respect the business and Sirio and his clientele. I had this guy who was eating baked potato every day. And I said, "Sirio, this is boring. Can I put some truffle on it?" So I made, and he was a famous man who was running one of the biggest company of cosmetic in America. And I said, "Can I put truffle?" So I scooped the potatoes, I crush it with butter and olive oil, and put a lot of chopped truffle, and then cover it with truffle. I put it back in the potatoes and cover it with truffle. And the guy was like, "Oh my God, I never had so good." But it was all like this. It was little by little changing things. But I didn't mind to be in between at that time. I was not unhappy. I was maybe a little bit in a straitjacket. I never worked so hard in my life. I mean, I lived on 66th and 3rd, and Le Cirque was on 65th and Park. And that's 4 blocks, 3 blocks, I mean. And some night I will take a cab to go home because I was just... I didn't want to work anymore. But at the same time, the compromise was working for me, and more I was proving who I was in the restaurant. and the past was get pushed out.
Le Cirque, in a way, was also one of the last restaurants of a certain era that was restaurateur-driven as opposed to chef-driven. So, out here reading about Le Cirque, it's like you hear Sirio, and
Of course.
I was looking at, your name isn't even on the menu.
Maybe not. Well, maybe, I was making my own, I was trying to get my own attention when I was there. And many customers knew me because they were regulars, and I will cook special things. But I was also trying to really change what the classic are. For example, I never cooked a bolito misto before. Cirque had this tradition on Friday or Saturday to do bolito misto. And so I look at the recipe, and it was so heavy and a little bit gross, and I was not really happy. And I tried to refine the bolito misto into something tasty, something in proportion. And Cirque loved it. He was always, we'll do pot-au-feu because, I wanted to do pot-au-feu, he wanted to do bolito misto, so we agreed to do it, to switch every week. And I will make big platter of pot-au-feu, steaming hot, coming to the dining room and having 5 different cuts of meat. And it was a socially driven restaurant where the food was not as important as the clientele. And for the credit of Cirque, he knew that the only way he could save his business is by being the best in the front. And that is the success of many restaurants where you wonder why people go there, and because the food is okay, but it's because the front man. And so it was powerful. The restaurant was some night it was just like crazy. And Hollywood, you have plenty of this restaurant those nights or those days. But for me, being at Le Cirque was impressive, and that's not maybe what made me stay there. After 4 years there, I decided to start a newsletter with my wife. I wanted to just do something for myself and talk about this seasonal cooking I love to do. And so every month I had a newsletter called Easy Cooking with Great Chef. And every month I was asking a chef. So that was Jean-Louis Paladin, that was Michel Richard, that was Thomas Keller, that was Lydia Bastianich and all that, to take the basket of the months I selected, and I had all kind of introduction to every vegetable and where it come from and its nutritional value and what to do with it. And then, and they made a menu with this. And then I had also a family meal dish I made myself, and a menu minceur, the Santé Cuisine, in honor of Michel Guérard, I was doing.
Good.
And I did that for a year, every month of the year, and it was great. Then my daughter was born, and my wife said, no more with this business. So, because we lost our shirt with it, it was crazy.
So what you're saying is that you were a food blogger.
Exactly. So imagine, I went one morning on the Today Show, and they plugged the newsletter, the phone number, the P.O. box address, because there was no email then. And within a minute I left the Today Show, we received about 1,000 phone calls. And then the little girl helping my wife there to do some writing with her and all that, and with me, went to the P.O. box, and she could not carry the bag because we had 2,000 letters. And I stupidly say, can you, if you send me a pre-stamped envelope, I will send you a newsletter. But now they were sending me envelope that big, they were sending me that big. And the newsletter was exactly the format. So basically we put all the letters into the bathtub and we moved the stamp one by one because there was too much money. And then after, stick them in our own envelope. and that was crazy. Had 3,000 members of the newsletter. And Jason Epstein, who was working at Random House at the time, loved the newsletter and said, Daniel, let's do a book. You stop the newsletter, let's do a book. So that's how I started my first book 20 years ago, of Cooking with Daniel Boulud, which out of print, but maybe in a thrift shop, maybe you can find it.
Your subtext then was easy recipes, easy dinners from great chefs, and your new book seems to be incredibly complicated recipes from a great chef.
Yeah, exactly. Because after this is book number 8, including a cocktail book and a letter to a young chef who is more addressed to young chef and a couple of recipes inside. But I did 4 cooking books, and 3 of them were mostly geared to be able to cook it at home. And I always had a writer who was a very good writer and a cookbook author, and but never a chef. And so the person will do the recipe at home. And I never did a cookbook who represent really what I do every day, rather than the inspiration I give from my cooking. And Daniel is about what I do every day, and what we do every day, not me, but my chef de cuisine, Jean-François Boel, and Eddie Leroux, and everybody there. And, but the recipe we wrote the way, then the recipe are compartmented by every important step in the recipe. So you can take the recipe, you can take the protein, you can take one garnish, you can take maybe the dressing or the sauce, and you can make something very wonderful for yourself. You don't have to go to the painstaking techniques and all that. I mean, if I ask you to make a Bavarois, there is a citrus cured fluke with a Bavarois shiso and all that. You don't have to go to make the whole thing. You just make the Bavarois, make it flat on something, and then cut it in pieces and put it on the plate, put a wonderful cured fluke on top, put, edamame beans around, and you have a wonderful dish. So, in a way, it's not that intimidating.
That's one of the advantages of working with that particular press, I imagine. You don't have an editor holding a gun to your head when you have 11 sub-recipes.
It was the commitment. Is that this is going to be a book about Daniel, and we're not going to cut any, we're not going to put any shortcut on the recipe, because that wouldn't be the same. That wouldn't represent the pictures, that would not. And so that's how we did it, and thanks to Grand Central Publishing. I mean, Karen Margulo was wonderful to that. And then the Buford part, so Daniel part, of course, is also with the essay on things who are so important to the experience of dining or the experience of cooking. The Bill Buford part was something compared to the work at Daniel, where it's a teamwork. It's me and every one of my cook. And I don't know any chef who does everything himself. That's for sure.
If you haven't seen the book, there's a section in the back with essays by Bill Buford, who wrote the book about cooking called Heat, which is super influential, and also, as a side note, wrote Among the Thugs about being with soccer hooligans in England. That's maybe one of the best nonfiction books in the last 25 years.
And that's Bill Buford. When he wrote Among the Thugs, when he was living in London, he decided to leave and to live with a hooligan. And when you're not a hooligan and you pierce when you pierce the club of hooligan, it can be very dangerous. And he did that for a year at least. And it's scary the way he dive in and want to just make sure he's touching the la matière.
Yeah, he's a scary looking guy, but he got stomped. The interesting thing about his essays is that you're going back to some of the very difficult classics that you cooked or did not cook as a young chef. And obviously Buford, although he's probably a very good home cook, it's one thing to be like a good home cook, and it's another thing to...
I don't think he sweated as hard than with me for doing those dishes. 4 years ago, Bill came to me, I met him, and periodically, he spent time in Washington with Michel Richard. And Michel Richard, who was in LA for many, many years, and he's a fantastic chef with Citronelle, and moved to DC and had Citronelle there, and is just opening Michel Richard at the Palace Hotel in in New York. And he loved Michel because, like Michel Guérard, who I worked with, who was a pastry chef and became a chef, Michel was the same thing. So there was this curiosity, techniques, affinity with food, which was different than a chef. And so after that, he came to me and we had a talk, and he said, you know, I want to go to France. I don't think anyone knows what they're talking about when they talk about the French, and I want to live with the French. And I said, well, where do you want to go? And he said, well, I don't know. I think I would like to go to Lyon because it seemed like where there's the biggest concentration of chefs and maybe the most best positioning to work from there. And he spent 4 years there. He brought his kid, who grew to learn French and become very French. Mm-hmm. And his wife is doing a master in wine. And Bill was an apprentice at La Mère Brasier. And La Mère Brasier is a very good chef today, Mathieu Vianney, who ran that restaurant. But it was the restaurant of a woman in the 30s who had 3-star in Lyon, and another 3-star outside of Lyon in the mountain, a summer restaurant, and the restaurant in Lyon. And left a legacy behind in Lyon in terms of women's cooking and all that. And so he spent his 4 years, and I was the only not the only chef, but I was the only chef who didn't spend time with me enough, or really knew my cooking, or really knew me cooking something. And so I invite him to New York, and I say, Bill, I'm writing this book about Daniel, but beside that, I would like to do dishes who are meaningful to me, who are reminiscent of French cuisine, but we are also reminiscent of the people I work for, or the opportunity I had sometime to do those dishes, but I just want to make them again with you, or to just make them differently for you and with you. So he came to New York, and every morning, 7:38 in the kitchen, and I told him, I say, you're not gonna be writing next to me, you're gonna be cooking next to me. I'm gonna make my dish, you're gonna make your dish with me. Mm-hmm. And so you cannot say it and you didn't understand how it was made or how you felt about it. And we did that for the entire session. And Bill was fun to cook with, and someone where I had no idea what was going on in his head when we were cooking. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he was asking weird questions, and I didn't know the answer. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he was arguing with me, and I'm like, you know, why don't you put kasha in your coulibiac? Because the coulibiac was done with kasha, which is a grain instead of rice and all that. And I say, well, you know, I mean, I did the recipe from Craig Claiborne, who inspired me to do this recipe once in New York. And so the hell with kasha. I don't have kasha here. Like coulibiac.
The chef culture now in the United States is very different than it was 20 years ago. It's like, and there's this almost, it's very visceral. There's like there's a physicality to it. There's even more heavy metal than you're used to in your kitchens.
Exactly.
And
hardcore and heavy metals.
And I don't think everybody knows about your love of hardcore and metal.
Yes, I do. And I think this book, they love what I do at Daniel. That's fine. You know, you do a fancy gig. But they really love the part with Buford because for them, it talked to them. It talked to what we love about food. And I would have done the whole book with it. But then that wasn't the start at the beginning. It was just a little portion inside.
So what do you think of the chef culture these days?
I love it. I'm inspired by it. I am sometimes worried. But I think it's, I want to make sure that it stay healthy sometime. Because, you know, I mean, how much, you know, pork fat can you eat sometime?
Yeah.
And, but it's fantastic because now there's this whole generation who had access to travel, access to learn in Europe, not only from the French, but from many other countries, the Spanish, the Scandinavian, the British, the Italian, the Middle East, Japan, and then also this young generation who have learned in America to look upon American chef, but to look upon also their zone, and sometimes they are very ethnic. I mean, I was with Roy Choi yesterday. I saw Roy Choi, and this is an example of somebody coming out of the terroir of LA.
Yeah.
Or the ghetto of LA, whatever.
I thought he did work a year at Le Bernardin.
Yeah, absolutely. But the kid was not destined to be a chef.
Yes.
And to cook maybe, or to be inspired to do what he does today. And I think what clicked all this, I think, was Tony Bourdain. I believe.
Really?
I think so. I think Tony Bourdain was such a wacko in the kitchen. And he kind of made this whole generation being a little more loose and at the same time ambitious and more vocal a little bit about what they do.
Interesting. Is it the influence of the young cooks in your kitchen that leads you to, I mean, you have dishes now with shiso, you use miso in a lot of dishes, things like shimaji.
No, it's the influence of the market. In New York, like LA, we are surrounded by a lot of ethnic cuisine. And so ethnic chef, ethnic restaurant bring ethnic market, and we borrow from those markets. We have Japanese suppliers, we have also Middle Eastern suppliers. But even when I was at Le Cirque, I was playing always with a palette of flavor. Whatever I could get at the time was, I mean, I was going to Brooklyn in the Jewish community there to get some Middle Eastern spice and all that, and going to the Bronx and in Arthur Avenue because there was some good Italian store there, and Chinatown, of course. But it wasn't so obvious in the cooking often, or we didn't make a fuss about it. But I think today, we make a point to show the complexity and the marriage. And I call the book My French Cuisine because I think I'm not extreme in what I do, and I am not really directing my cooking toward a pure inspiration, a pure translation of a classic, but it's more a combination of ingredient and texture and technique borrowed from other cuisine as well.
Fantastic. And where do you see cuisine going, or where do you see your cuisine going?
Well, I think in America, cuisine is going to keep growing, refining, and it keep expanding in the most remote places, I think, and that's, I think, what's fantastic. My French cuisine, I don't know, I've been cooking for 44 years. I don't know if I can cook for another 44, but I'm definitely not ready to quit. And so, and I think what I cook today, of course, I have many restaurants, and I cook many different styles, and I have Boulud with homage to charcuterie, where 6 years ago, or 8 years ago almost, I started with Gilles Véraud in Paris, a charcutier. I was looking for a real charcutier, but somebody who could understand me, of more a closer generation. And I found this young charcutier in Paris who was the third generation charcutier from Saint-Étienne and married to a second generation charcutier, his wife. She was not charcutier, but she was the wife, the daughter of a charcutier. And they have 2 stores in Paris. And he spoke English, which I was like, whoa, charcutier speaking English. He spoke a little bit of English. But, and I went to Paris to his store. The first time I met him, I was introduced by a chef in Paris who put me in touch with him. And I was trying to find that charcutier in Lyon, but because Gilles was from Saint-Étienne next to Lyon, when my friend told me about him, it was fantastic. And so I we went on his Vespa to Paris and got to the charcuterie when he closed at 7 o'clock at night, 7:30, to meet him. And he took me to his office, and there were like maybe 20 different charcuterie to taste there. And I was like, this is it. This is my dream come true. Because coming from Lyon, and I tasted everything. We drank, we tasted, we made friends that first night. And I invited him to New York, and he never cooked in New York, never presented. And I invited 30 journalists in New York before we did something together. And we cooked a lot of charcuterie in New York, but he also brought charcuterie from Paris. So we had a buffet with like 40 different things, hot, cold, and all that. And boudin, and sausage, and terrine, and pâté, and confit, and everyone was like, my God, we have never seen that in America. And so Boulud came about, and I wanted to create a wine bar bistro with the charcuterie program. And that's how we started Boulud and Gilles Association. And then after I did DBGB, and there I wanted to do homage to sausage, because I felt, so Boulud was a little more traditional toward Gilles Véro style and his recipe and our relationship and talking about making some new recipe together. And then DBGB was more about a little bit of classical French sausage from Boudin Basse to Toulouse-style sausage to a more Morteau sausage and Lyonnaise, but also to travel the world with sausage, because it don't matter where you go, there is always a good sausage. and so, and the poorer the country, the more they grind the meat.
Yeah, and you also have Marquis Ramon's spaghetti.
Marquis Ramon spaghetti, that's another one, because, so DBGB, we had a full program of sausage, 16 different sausage, and from Austrian to Thai, to American, hot dog, of course, to South American, and then French and German and English, and Italian. But it was, this was a fun collaboration, because Gilles, as a French, never made a Thai sausage. And so it was really fun. And the rock and roll side was because it was next to CBGB, the old punk rock club, where Marquis Ramon was playing there in the 70s, and the club closed, and I was a block away. And when I met the restaurant there, I needed to find a name to go in front of the community board and to present my project. And so my director of operations said, hey, why don't you call it DBGB? And so we call it DBGB, and it was a stick. And then I met Marquis Ramon, and he told me the story. And his father was a chef in Brooklyn, and he made this wonderful tomato sauce. And now he's jarring the tomato sauce. He's selling the tomato sauce. So I said, okay, bring me the tomato sauce at DBGB. I'll make a spaghetti. I'll make fresh pasta with your tomato sauce in honor of your father.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, I think it's probably time to open this up to questions, if that's okay.
Yes. Thank you for being a food critic, because it's not easy to be a chef, but I think it's not easy to be a food critic either.
No, so sometimes no.
I know. I mean, you have a lot of good perks, but I know that sometimes it's not always easy to make a decision on your experience, and but yet it's always constructive. And I take all criticism very seriously, but I also always make sure that my team understands that criticism is going to help us, and we're going to get better. And I just, failed to impress a critic in New York lately.
It happens.
So I wanted to ask you, in this time of escalating markups, how do you strike the balance between profitability and enjoyability, if that's a word?
I enjoyed, you mean the balance between?
Yeah, charging the price that allows you to make a profit, but not gouge the client and allow them to enjoy good wines at a good price.
Yes. So at Daniel, for example, we have almost $1.5 million of wine. It's an investment. It's an investment. Normally the markup can be between 1.5%. Between. Sorry.
Oh, 1.5 times.
No, yeah,
No?
1.5 time to sometimes 4.5 time. It all depends on the value of the wine, on the market value of the wine, and on the rarity of the wine. But at Daniel, I always make sure that we have the right balance. But Daniel as a restaurant, the way we operate, the way we keep investing in the restaurant, the combination of food and wine is indispensable. I don't think we could run the restaurant without the wine component revenue, but at the same time, it has basically wine is run in average between 27, 28, and 30% cost. No, depends. I mean, sometimes no. I would say no. It's between. I would say yeah. What I was saying, 1.5, which is basically it could be between 15 and 60% cost. And but that I know that in California, a lot of restaurants you can bring your own wine, and in New York, I cannot afford to do that. I have 135 people working at Daniel. When I opened Daniel, I risk everything in my life and I borrow $10 million. And like I say, and 10 years later, we invested another $5 million in it to make sure that the restaurant stay pristine, stay strong, stay on its mark. And without being able to earn a profit, because food, it has its limitation. The profit you earn in food is not enough to make a restaurant survive and be able to keep reinvesting in it and to keep an amazing team. I mean, I want my chef to be well paid. I want my staff to be well compensated. And without that, I cannot afford to do that.
Yes? Oh, sorry. Follow the microphone.
Chef. I had a quick question for you, Chef. I know you talked about the changing culture for chefs since the beginning of your career, and I was interested in the flip side of the coin. So with the proliferation of the internet and diners being able to read about ingredients and magazines and TV, how have you noticed the knowledge level of diners to have changed over the years? And then along with that, how does that affect how you design the menus? And, you know,
I think, of course, today there is too much information sometimes. And I go to China and I sit down with a 23-year-old girl who is interviewing me, and she knows more about me than anyone in my family. And so with the cooking, it's the same thing. I think it takes away the dream to take a journey and go to a restaurant and discover the cooking. I'm sure that when you went to Michel Guérard, the only thing you knew maybe was his cookbook. But you couldn't really tell about him, the experience. And I think today, sometimes that's a little bit sad because there's so much. And chef, we are getting, we love it. I think we thrive on it. And I think it's incredible the speed of absorption we take from information. I mean, a chef in Australia, a chef in South America, and all that. You see what everybody is doing, and it's exciting, but it's disturbing. I don't know if I could have cooked 44 years with this kind of disturbance.
In the old days, if somebody in New York wanted to sort of, lift a dish from a restaurant in San Sebastian or from Georges Blanc or something, they could do it, and there weren't going to be that many people that would call them on it. Now,
Yeah.
everybody knows.
No, absolutely. Now you know right away if you copy somebody. And then you're confused. Who started that dish? Because they're all copying each other. But in a sense, you were talking about the young chef, and I think there's an amazing movement about passion on farmers, passion to, farm to table. California was the catalyzer of that for sure, and it's crossing all over. And I was born and raised on a farm, and God, I would dream to have a farm today, and maybe I will have one.
Yeah.
But it's that, and is also the fact that they are making, cooking with so much gusto and so much terroir in where they come from. And
Are you finding it easier to sell like organ meats or to sell things like goat than you were?
At the Cirque, I was cooking brains, I was cooking tripe, I was cooking tongues, veal cheeks, calf heads, and I was cooking everything head to toes at the Cirque already, so I never stopped doing that. We're a little bit more tame now. I don't put you half a tongue on a plate. But
it used to be just like the sort of like old timers who would order that stuff.
Exactly.
And now
absolutely. Now it's back in fashion.
Yeah.
And that's why I said this session with Bill kind of like, it kicked every chef for what we dream to cook tomorrow and go back to the past in order to create a new tomorrow. So,
with the expanse of your empire now, how much time do you actually have to be hands-on or supervising the quality control in your kitchens versus the administrative stuff of running all of these places?
I leave the administrative to other people. I live at Daniel and that's why the book, the last part is cooking at home, because my apartment is right above the restaurant. And so I live and breathe at Daniel 3/4 of my life, and cook there. But at the same time, Daniel is only open at dinner and 6 days a week. And the rest of the week, during the morning, I go and visit my other restaurant. I check out with my administrative people. In New York, we are about 850 employees. And we have about 40 or 50 people. How many are you, Lauren? This is my director. 45 people at Dynex, which is the management company. And they are all specialized in assisting. There's a person specialized in accounting. There's many people and CFO, but there's also a COO who has director of operation, and those people are in charge of micromanaging managers and chefs. But then there is also a person in charge of purchasing to be able to relieve the chef from constantly trying to find new ingredients, to know who is doing what, and trying to have relationship with suppliers. So he's helping that. And then we have a HR, of course, is an important thing, and a director of wine, and a director of PR, Lauren, and also and many assistants to that. And so that relieved me. They want to make sure that I stay who I am, Daniel the cook.
Terrific.
Yeah, and then I spend about, I would say, between my restaurant in New York and Daniel, about 8 hours a day out of my 14 in the kitchen. I spend during the day lunch in my other restaurants, and on weekend I always eat in my restaurant. I love to sit down and eat the food we make with my chef. And every chef I have has to be interacting into the creation of recipe, because otherwise it could not work for me. I don't want to be the sole person giving him a recipe and said, this is what you have to cook. Usually they work for me for many years and they understand what I want and stay in the frame of what we do. And then I travel because I love to travel. Otherwise I wouldn't be in America. And that's why I'm in Singapore, and that's why I'm in Beijing and London. But I don't go that often. I go periodically, maybe twice a year in Asia and 4 times a year in London, but then I make a detour to see my parents in Lyon.
Now, weren't there rumors of a restaurant in Paris at some point?
Yeah, but that was with François Pinault, the owner of Christie's and Sotheby's, Christie's only, and also Chateau Latour. And he was bringing Christie's to Paris, and near Avenue Montaigne was a location he had, and he said, Daniel, I would love for you to do a restaurant in Paris. And I was not organized then. I only had 1 restaurant or 2 maybe, but no, I had 1 restaurant, Daniel. And I didn't have a structure. I didn't have anybody around me but the people working for me. And so I gave it up. And Jean-Georges Van Gerichten, who was already flying around, did the restaurant there. But I want to try to find a little bouchon in Lyon and put an American chef in it and show it, and we can cook French food, old-fashioned way with an American chef.
This question pertains to culture of today's kitchen as well. And that's, you worked 2 years, 3 years, 2 years, 4 years in 3-star restaurants. But nowadays, you see a lot more movement of young chefs after 6 months, a year.
Yes.
And you talk about ambition, but isn't there also a little bit of impatience and eagerness to get out, and therefore you're losing some of that depth of knowledge? Isn't that a danger?
I think, and for me, I never wanted to work less than 2 years. I felt 2 years was the 2 cycle of the season, and the reinventing of each, the reinvention of each season and how it was approaching that. So before you work for someone, you study about someone, but then you cook there and you really learn a lot of fundamental and also a certain fraternity, union among chefs and fraternity happened because we spend most of our life together. There is no private life when you are a chef. There is mostly a working life. And so 2 years is good because you exchange a lot. And for me in France, depends the cycle, but there was always some cooks leaving, some cooks coming, but most of them staying 2 years. We will exchange recipe because at the time we didn't have so many cookbook published, and we will exchange recipe. Oh, you worked there. What did you do? Yeah, here's my book from what I worked there. And that's how we build up a little bit more knowledge without having to work with every one of them. And, but, today they are sometimes moving around, but I'm very proud to say it. And I have many young chefs who came from apprentice, and meaning at school during their externship, and became chef in my restaurant. And so that means that take them 5 to 6 years, and they stick with it. So that's good.
I want to ask a question that a lot of people want to know the answer, probably. When are you opening in the Southern California area or California?
There's place, I want to come for pleasure. And my daughter just moved in San Francisco, and she grew up in New York, went to the French school, very French, but very, American. And after she moved to Singapore after graduation, she was with Cameron Puck, the son of Wolfgang, also at Tufts. And then she moved to Singapore, then came back to New York, worked for LVMH, a big company, on their private equity, and headed. And then she wanted to work for a tech company, and she said, Dad, I want to move to San Francisco. And through her connection, she found a wonderful job at Flipboard. And so she is living in San Francisco for 6 months now. She bought a bag, she goes to the farmer's market, she cooks for friends all the time. She's doing climbing, rock climbing, mountain climbing. She's so happy. And sorry? Where? No, Flipboard. Flipboard, you know the app, Flipboard there. And so I'm excited. Tomorrow I'm going to San Francisco to see her. That's her birthday.
Hurrah.
So I'm going to come to California a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.